The scream that tore through the dusty streets of San Elizario, Texas, on that scorching August morning in 1876, was enough to curdle fresh milk, and Delilah Kincaid heard it from her small cabin at the edge of town, where the desert began its endless stretch toward Mexico. She was grinding dried chamomile flowers with her mortar and pestle when the sound reached her, and her hands stilled. The scream came again, sharper this time, filled with the particular agony that spoke of either childbirth gone wrong or a body burning with fever. Delilah wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed her worn leather bag already packed with remedies, and hurried toward town despite knowing what reception awaited her. The sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way along the dirt path, her dark hair tied back in a practical bun, her simple brown dress already dusty at the hem. At 24 years old, Delilah had lived in San Elizario for 3 years, ever since her grandmother passed and left her the small plot of land and the knowledge of healing herbs that had been passed down through generations of women in her family. What had been respected wisdom in her grandmother's time was now viewed with suspicion and fear. "Witch," someone hissed as she passed. Delilah kept her eyes forward. "Devil woman," another voice added, and she heard someone spit in the dirt behind her. The screaming was coming from the boarding house, and when Delilah reached the front steps, Mrs. Crawford blocked her path. The older woman's face was red and sweaty, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. "We do not need your dark remedies here," Mrs. Crawford said firmly. "Someone is in pain," Delilah replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I can help. You can poison them, more like. Fill them with your strange concoctions and herbs picked under a full moon while chanting to Satan himself." "I do not chant to anyone," Delilah said quietly. "I use plants that God put on this earth for healing. Willow bark for pain, yarrow for bleeding, golden seal for infection. The same remedies your own grandmothers likely used. Get away from here before I call the sheriff." Delilah stood her ground for a moment longer, listening to the agonized cries from inside. Then she turned away, her throat tight with frustration and helplessness. She had seen this pattern before. They would refuse her help, someone would suffer needlessly, and yet the accusations against her would only grow. She was blamed for every misfortune in town despite being the one person trying to prevent them. She was walking back toward her cabin when a horse and rider approached at a gallop, sending up plumes of dust. The rider pulled up short when he saw her, and Delilah found herself looking up at a man she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim, curling slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking hazel, currently narrowed with urgency. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, worn boots and a hat pushed back on his head. "You are the herb woman," he said. It was not a question. "Some call me that, others use less kind names." "My brother," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "He got trampled by a spooked horse 2 days ago. His leg is bad, real bad. The doctor in town bled him and said there was nothing more to be done, just to pray and prepare for the worst. But Kieran is tough. He does not deserve to die because of a skittish mare and a rattlesnake." Delilah studied the man's face. She saw no mockery there, no fear or suspicion. Only desperate hope. "What is your name?" she asked. "Kellan Grady. My brother and I work the cattle ranch north of town. Please, I have money. I will pay whatever you ask." "I do not want your money," Delilah said. "Take me to him." The relief that flooded Kellan's face was so profound that Delilah felt something shift in her chest. He helped her up onto his horse, and she settled behind him, her bag clutched against her side. She had never been this close to a man who was not afraid of her, and she could feel the solid warmth of his back through his shirt. Smell the honest scent of leather and sweat and sun. They rode hard out of town, past the scattered buildings and into the open country where mesquite and creosote dotted the landscape. The ranch house was modest, built of adobe with a wooden porch. Kellan helped her down and led her inside quickly. The smell hit her first, the sickly sweet odor of infection that she had come to dread. Kellan Grady lay on a bed in the corner of the main room, his face gray and sheened with sweat. He was younger than Kellan, perhaps 21 or 22, and his resemblance to his brother was clear in the shape of his jaw and nose. His leg was badly swollen, the skin tight and discolored. Delilah knelt beside the bed and opened her bag, her mind already cataloging what she would need. "When did he last drink water?" "This morning, but he brought most of it back up." "I need boiling water as much as you can manage, clean cloths, and a basin." Kellan moved immediately to comply, and Delilah began her examination. The leg was broken, that much was clear, and the bone had been poorly set. Worse, infection had taken hold in the deep bruising along his thigh. The doctor's bleeding had only weakened Kellan further. "This is going to be difficult," she said honestly when Kellan returned with a pot of water beginning to steam over the fire. "The bone needs to be reset, and I need to draw out the infection. It will be painful for him." "Will he live?" Delilah looked up at Kellan and saw the fear beneath his stoic expression. "If we act quickly, yes, I believe he will." "Then do what you need to do." Delilah worked through the afternoon and into the evening. She made a tea from willow bark and valerian root to help with pain, coaxing Kellan to drink it in small sips. She cleaned the wound with a mixture of warm water and golden seal, her hands gentle but thorough. The leg had to be rebroken and set properly, and even with the pain-reducing tea, Kellan screamed when she and Kellan worked together to align the bone. Kellan held his brother's shoulders, his own face pale and strained, speaking words of comfort and encouragement. Once the bone was set and splinted with wood and strips of cloth, Delilah turned her attention to the infection. She made a poultice from ground echinacea, yarrow, and plantain leaves, mixing it with a bit of honey to help it bind. This she spread thickly over the worst of the bruising and swelling, covering it with clean cloth. "He needs to drink as much as he can," she told Kellan. "Water with a bit of salt and honey will help replace what he has lost. The tea I made for pain, he can have more in a few hours. I will make something to fight the infection, but it will take time to brew properly." "You are going to stay," Kellan said, and again it was not quite a question. "He needs watching through the night. The fever may get worse before it breaks." "If it does, we will need to keep him cool and make sure he drinks." Kellan nodded, and some of the terrible tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Thank you. I do not know why the town speaks of you the way they do. You are no witch." "People fear what they do not understand," Delilah said softly. "My grandmother was well respected, but she had the benefit of being old. A young woman working alone with herbs and remedies fits their idea of something dark and dangerous. It is easier to condemn than to learn." "It is ignorant and cruel," Kellan said with unexpected heat. "You are helping people, or you would be if they would let you." Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. It had been so long since anyone had defended her, had seen her as anything other than someone to fear and avoid. She busied herself with organizing her supplies to hide the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Tell me about your brother," she said, wanting to shift the focus away from herself. Kellan settled into a chair by Kellan's bedside, and as the sun sank lower and painted the room in shades of orange and gold, he talked. He told her how they had come to Texas from Missouri 5 years ago after their parents died of cholera, how they had worked as ranch hands and saved every penny until they could lease their own small spread. How Kellan could rope a steer faster than anyone Kellan had ever seen, and how he had a gift with horses that seemed almost magical. He was working with that new mare, the one we bought off a trader passing through. She seemed gentle enough, but something spooked her. Maybe a snake, maybe just a shadow. She reared up and Kellan went down, and then she was stamping in fear and he could not get clear in time. Kellan's voice roughened. I heard the bone break from 20 feet away. Horse injuries are some of the worst, Delilah said. But his youth and strength are on his side, and he has you. We are all the family each other has left. Delilah understood that kind of isolation, though hers was by necessity rather than death. She checked on Kellan, who was sleeping fitfully, his skin still hot to the touch but no worse than before. She went outside to the small garden behind the house, where a few scraggly vegetables struggled in the harsh Texas soil, and beyond to where she could see wild plants growing. The light was fading, but she found what she needed: more yarrow, some wild oregano, and feverfew. She gathered them carefully, offering a quiet word of thanks as her grandmother had taught her. When she came back inside, Kellan had lit several lamps, pushing back the darkness. He was sponging his brother's face with cool water, and the tenderness in the gesture made Delilah's throat tighten. I will make the infusion now, she said. It needs to steep for several hours, but he can start drinking it before morning. She worked at the table, crushing and measuring, adding herbs to boiling water in careful proportions. This was where the accusations of witchcraft came from, she knew. The precision, the muttered calculations, the strange plants rendered down to mysterious liquids. But there was no magic here, only knowledge and careful attention. How did you learn all this? Kellan asked, watching her work. My grandmother taught me, and her mother taught her. It goes back further than anyone can remember. In some places, herb women are still respected. But since the war, since everything became so unsettled, people are looking for someone to blame for every hardship. A woman alone is an easy target. You are not alone right now, Kellan said quietly. Delilah looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Something warm and steady that made her pulse quicken. The night stretched long. Kellan's fever spiked just after midnight, and they worked together to bring it down, sponging him with cool water and coaxing him to drink. Delilah sang softly as she worked, old songs her grandmother had taught her, and she noticed Kellan listening, his expression softening. You have a beautiful voice, he said during a quiet moment when Kellan had fallen back into restless sleep. My grandmother said that healing is not just about the body, the spirit needs tending too. Is that part of why they call you a witch? The singing? Perhaps, or perhaps they would find fault no matter what I did. She wrung out the cloth in the basin of water, watching the way the lamplight caught in the ripples. I have thought about leaving San Elizario, going somewhere I am not known, but this is my home. My grandmother is buried here. And I cannot help but think that eventually people will need my help badly enough that they will have to set aside their fear. They are fools, Kellan said with quiet intensity. Any one of them would be lucky to have you care for them the way you are caring for a stranger. Kellan is not a stranger anymore, Delilah said. And neither are you. Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but profound. Delilah felt it settle into her bones, warm and unsettling and entirely unexpected. She had not allowed herself to think of companionship, of connection in so long. The isolation had become her shield. But Kellan was looking at her like she was something precious, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. By morning, Kellan's fever had broken. He woke confused and in pain but lucid. When he saw Delilah, he managed a weak smile. "Am I dead? Because you look like an angel," Kellan snorted. "You are not dead, you fool. This is Miss Kincaid. She has spent all night saving your worthless hide." "The herb woman," Kieran's eyes widened. "The one they call a witch in town." "I prefer Herbalist," Delilah said mildly, checking his pulse at his wrist. "And I would prefer you call me Delilah. How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse." "That would be because you did. Your leg was badly broken and infected. You will need to stay off it for several weeks at least, and even then you will need to be careful, but you will recover." Kieran looked at his brother. "You brought her here." "I did. The doctor said I would die." "The doctor is an idiot who thinks bleeding cures everything," Kellan said bluntly. Delilah knew what to do. The use of her first name made Delilah's cheeks warm. She stood, gathering her things to give herself something to do. "I need to go back to my cabin for more supplies." "I will return this afternoon to check on you and change the dressing." "I will ride with you," Kellan said immediately. "That is not necessary. It is not safe for you to ride alone. I walked to town alone this morning, and I saw how people treated you." Kellan's jaw was set in a stubborn line. "I am riding with you." Delilah wanted to argue, to insist on her independence, but the truth was that the idea of his company was far more appealing than it should be. She nodded. The ride back to her cabin was quiet at first, comfortable in a way that surprised her. The morning sun was already hot, promising another scorching day. When they reached her small home, Delilah hesitated before dismounting. "Would you like to come in?" "I have coffee, and I need to gather the supplies." Kellan's smile transformed his face, and Delilah felt her heart skip. "I would like that very much." Her cabin was small but tidy, one main room with a sleeping area curtained off in the corner, and a large table dominated by her work. Bundles of drying herbs hung from the rafters, and shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and bottles of various sizes. It smelled of sage and lavender and countless other plants, an earthy, living scent. Kellan looked around with open curiosity, while Delilah made coffee over her small stove. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A cauldron and a black cat." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I do not know. I never believed the stories, but I suppose some part of me expected something more mysterious." "Just a woman and her plants," Delilah said, handing him a cup of coffee. "I am sorry I have no cream or sugar. This is fine, better than fine." He took a sip and sighed. "Thank you for the coffee and for everything you did for Kieran. I was so scared." "I could tell." "You hit it well, but I could tell. He is my only family. If I lost him, I do not know what I would do." Delilah sat across from him at the table. "You love him very much." "He is my brother. And more than that, he is my best friend. We have been through everything together." "That is a rare and precious thing." Something in her tone made Kellan look at her more closely. "You have no family." "Not anymore. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my grandmother, and she passed 3 years ago. There was a man once back east before we came to Texas. But when he learned about my grandmother's work, about what I was learning, he said he could not marry a woman who practiced dark arts." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. That was the phrase he used, dark arts, as if mixing willow bark tea was the same as summoning demons. "He was a fool," Kellan said fiercely. "Worse than a fool, blind and stupid and not worthy of you." The vehemence in his voice startled her. "You do not know me well enough to say that. I know you spent all night saving my brother's life. I know you are kind and skilled and brave enough to walk into a town that hates you because you heard someone in pain. That is enough for me to know his loss was your gain. You deserve better than a man who could not see your worth." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you," she managed. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Kellan cleared his throat. "Would you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "About the herbs, the remedies. I want to understand what you do." Delilah stared at him. "Why?" "Because it is useful knowledge. Because I want to be able to help Kellan myself if something happens again, and because I want to understand your work. I have never had anyone ask me that before. Will you teach me?" Delilah felt something unfurl in her chest, something that had been closed tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "Yes," she said, "I will teach you." Over the following weeks, as Kellan recovered, Kellan became a fixture in Delilah's life. He would ride into town in the mornings to bring her out to the ranch, where she would check on his brother and change dressings. Kellan healed well, the infection clearing and the bone knitting properly, and his natural good humor returned as the pain faded. But it was the afternoons that Delilah treasured most. After tending to Kellan, she would take Kellan out into the scrubland around the ranch, teaching him to identify plants. She showed him yarrow with its feathery leaves and white flower clusters, explained how it stopped bleeding and fought infection. She taught him to recognize the distinctive smell of wild oregano and how to find the unassuming plantain that grew in disturbed soil and could be used for everything from insect bites to wounds. Kellan proved an eager student, his hands surprisingly gentle as he learned to harvest leaves without damaging the plant, to crush seeds to release their oils, to judge the proper proportions for teas and poultices. He asked thoughtful questions and remembered everything she told him. "You have a gift for this," she told him one afternoon as they sat in the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree, sorting through the plants they had gathered. "I have a good teacher," he replied, and the warmth in his voice made her pulse quicken. They were sitting close, their shoulders nearly touching, and Delilah was acutely aware of his presence. Over the weeks, her initial wariness had given way to something far more dangerous. She found herself thinking of him at odd moments, remembering the way he smiled or the sound of his laugh. She noticed the small kindnesses he showed without thinking. The way he always made sure she ate when she was focused on treating Kellan, how he had mended the loose board on her cabin steps without being asked, the wildflowers he had left on her table one morning with no explanation. "Delilah," he said, and something in his tone made her look up. His hazel eyes were serious. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you, feelings that go beyond gratitude or friendship. I know we have not known each other long, and I know your life has not given you much reason to trust men, but I cannot keep silent anymore. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. You are brilliant and kind and braver than any man I know. When I am with you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." Delilah's breath caught. "Kellan, you do not have to say anything right now," he continued quickly. "I just needed you to know, whatever you feel or do not feel, it will not change how I treat you. You will always be welcome at the ranch, and I will always be grateful for what you did for Kellan." "Stop talking," Delilah said, and when he looked startled, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm and calloused from work, his fingers strong. "I have feelings for you too. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I cannot seem to help it. You see me, Kellan, not the witch, not the strange woman who lives alone. You see me, and that is a gift I never expected to receive." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sure and perfect. She had been kissed before, but never like this, never with this sense of rightness and coming home. Her free hand came up to cup his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palm, and he made a low sound of pleasure that sent warmth flooding through her. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Kellan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want everyone in San Elizario to see that you are a good woman deserving of respect. I want to marry you if you will have me." "The town will not make it easy," Delilah warned. "They hate me. They will hate you by association. Let them hate." "I do not care what they think. Do you?" Delilah realized with a start that she did not. For years she had been trying to win the town's approval to make them see reason. But here was Kellan, offering her something better: acceptance, respect, love. His opinion mattered more than the collective judgment of every person in San Elizario. "No," she said. "I do not care what they think." "Then say yes. Say you will let me court you." "Yes." He kissed her again, longer this time, and when they finally made their way back to the ranch house, Kieran took one look at their joined hands and grinned. "About time," he said. "I have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. It was painful." "You are supposed to be resting," Kellan said, but there was no heat in it. "I am resting, just with my eyes open." Kieran looked at Delilah with surprising seriousness. "He is a good man, the best I know, but I think you have already figured that out." "I have," Delilah said softly. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Delilah had experienced. Kellan was attentive without being overbearing, romantic without being foolish. He brought her gifts from town, small things like a new mortar and pestle made of good stone, a bolt of pretty fabric for a dress, a book on medicinal plants that he had sent away for and must have cost him dearly. They spent long hours together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents and the farm they had worked, about the horror of the cholera epidemic that had taken them both within a week. She shared her own losses, the way her parents had died in a fire when she was 8, how her grandmother had saved her and raised her and given her purpose. "She would have liked you," Delilah said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sun set over the desert. She always said that a person's character was shown in how they treated those who could do nothing for them. "You treat everyone with respect, even me when the whole town told you not to." "The whole town can go to hell," Kellan said mildly. "Present company accepted." Delilah laughed. "I do not think I count as part of the town in most people's minds. That will change." "Will it?" "When you are my wife, they will have to accept you, or they will ostracize both of us." Kellan shrugged. "Then we will be ostracized together." "Delilah, I am not going to pretend this will be easy, but I am not afraid of hard things. The only thing I am afraid of is losing you." "You will not lose me," she promised. 2 months after that first desperate ride to the ranch, Kieran was walking again with only a slight limp that Delilah assured him would fade with time. The leg had healed straight and strong, a testament to her skill. To celebrate, Kellan invited her to dinner at the ranch, and she arrived to find the table set with care, wildflowers in a jar in the center, and the best dishes the brothers owned. Kieran had made himself scarce after the meal, claiming he needed to check on the horses despite the darkness, and Delilah found herself alone with Kellan by the fire. "I have something for you," he said, and pulled a small box from his pocket. Delilah's heart began to pound as he dropped to one knee before her. "Delilah Kincaid, I know we have not been courting long by most people's standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my heart, my partner, my equal in every way. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small stone, nothing ostentatious but clearly chosen with care. Delilah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was standing, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. She clung to him, feeling like she was falling and flying at the same time. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you," he replied. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how much." They planned a small ceremony. Just a few people, including Kellan and the justice of the peace from a neighboring town, since the one in San Elizario would likely refuse. But word got out, as word always did in a small town, and the reaction was swift and ugly. Mrs. Crawford organized a group of women who came to Delilah's cabin 3 days before the planned wedding. Delilah was grinding herbs when she heard the voices outside, and her stomach sank when she recognized the tone. She opened the door to find a dozen women standing in her yard, their faces hard with judgment and fear. "You will not marry Kellan Grady," Mrs. Crawford announced. "We will not allow a witch to join our community through marriage." "I am not a witch," Delilah said, keeping her voice level with effort. "I am an herbalist. There is a difference. You cast spells and use dark magic. Everyone knows it. I use plants that God created to help people heal." "That is not magic. That is knowledge and skill." "You bewitched Kellan Grady," another woman said, "made him fall in love with you through your potions." "I did no such thing. Kellan chose me of his own free will." "We know your kind," Mrs. Crawford said, her voice rising. "You seduce good men and lead them astray. You cause crops to fail and animals to sicken. You are a blight on this town." "I have never harmed anyone," Delilah said, feeling her own anger rising now. "I have only tried to help. When your daughter had that terrible cough last winter, Mrs. Crawford, I left a bottle of syrup on your porch. I saw her drinking it through the window. It cured her cough in 3 days." Mrs. Crawford's face flushed red. "That was Christian charity from the church. It was my remedy. I recognized the bottle when I saw it sitting on your kitchen table." "But you could not admit that the witch's medicine worked, could you?" "Get out," Mrs. Crawford hissed. "Get out of San Elizario before we run you out." "I am marrying Kellan in 3 days. After that, I will be living at his ranch." "But I will not leave this town just because you are afraid of what you do not understand." The women left, but Delilah could see the violence brewing just beneath the surface. She immediately saddled her horse and rode to the ranch to tell Kellan what had happened. His face darkened as she spoke. "I will go into town and talk to them. That will only make it worse. They already think I have bewitched you. I do not care what they think. I care about your safety and Kieran's. If the town turns against you because of me, you could lose your livelihood. Who will hire you for cattle drives or sell you supplies if everyone believes you are under a witch's spell?" Kellan pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "Then we will find another town, another life. I will not give you up, Delilah, not for fear or prejudice or ignorance. I do not want you to give up everything for me. You are not asking me to. I am choosing you. There is a difference." The wedding took place as planned, small and simple but filled with more love than many grand ceremonies. Kellan stood as witness, grinning throughout, and the justice of the peace, an older man named Judge Thompson, read the vows with warmth and sincerity. When Kellan kissed his bride, Delilah felt something settle deep in her soul. She was no longer alone. She was no longer the feared witch of San Elizario. She was Kellan's wife, Kieran's sister, part of a family. They had a wedding supper at the ranch, just the 3 of them, and Kellan raised his glass in a toast. "To my brother and his brilliant wife. May you have a lifetime of happiness and more patience than you probably need to put up with each other." They laughed and drank, and later, when Kellan had retired to the small bunk room the brothers had added onto the house when they first built it, Kellan led Delilah to the bedroom that would now be theirs. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he said, and she laughed. "I want this to be perfect for you. It will be perfect because it is you and me." She reached up to cup his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of evening stubble. "I love you, Kellan Grady." "I love you, Delilah Grady." The sound of her new name made her smile, and then he was kissing her, and nervousness gave way to desire. He undressed her slowly, his touch reverent, and she explored the planes of his body with growing confidence. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "Are you all right?" Kellan asked immediately, concern flooding his face. "I am perfect," she whispered. "I am just happy, so impossibly happy." He smiled and kissed her again, and they loved each other through the night with growing passion and tenderness in equal measure. The trouble came 2 weeks later. Delilah was at the ranch, working in the small garden. She had started to grow more herbs when she heard riders approaching. Kellan and Kieran were out checking the fence lines, and she was alone. A group of men from town rode into the yard, 6 of them, led by a rancher named Samuel Hutchins, who had always been among the most vocal in his hatred of her. Delilah stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands, her heart beginning to race. "Mrs. Grady," Hutchins said, his tone mocking the title, "we have come to give you and your husband a warning." "What warning is that?" "Leave San Elizario. Take your husband and his brother and go somewhere else. We do not want your kind here." "My kind? You mean a woman who tries to heal the sick?" "I mean a witch. My son fell ill 2 days after your wedding, broke out in a terrible rash and fever. That is your curse, is it not? Punishment for our trying to stop your unholy union." "Your son has measles," Delilah said, recognizing the symptoms he described. "It is going around. 3 children in town have it, and one of the ranch hands from the Circle T. It has nothing to do with me." "Liar," one of the other men spat. "She is lying," another agreed. "She cursed us all." Delilah saw the violence in their eyes and knew she was in danger. She began to back toward the house, hoping to get inside where she could bar the door, but Hutchins dismounted and grabbed her arm. "You are not going anywhere. Let me go." "We should burn her," someone said. "Burn her like they did witches in Salem." "This is not Salem, and I am not a witch." Delilah wrenched her arm free and ran for the house. She made it to the door, but hands grabbed her from behind, and she screamed as loudly as she could, hoping Kellan was close enough to hear. The men dragged her back into the yard, and Hutchins pulled a rope from his saddle. Delilah's blood turned to ice when she saw it. They were serious. They were actually going to hurt her, maybe kill her. "Stop!" The shout came from Kieran, who was running toward the house from the direction of the corrals, his slight limp barely slowing him down. "Let her go." "Stay out of this, boy," Hutchins warned. "This does not concern you." "That is my sister you are manhandling. It concerns me plenty." Kieran reached them and threw a punch that caught Hutchins squarely in the jaw, sending the older man stumbling back. But Kieran was outnumbered, and 2 of the men grabbed him while another punched him hard in the stomach. Kieran went down gasping. "Kieran!" Delilah tried to reach him, but she was held fast. Then Kellan was there, riding in at a gallop, his face a mask of fury. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and went straight for the man holding Delilah. "Get your hands off my wife." Kellan's fist connected with the man's face and Delilah was free. She stumbled and nearly fell, but caught herself and ran to where Kieran was struggling to his feet. "Are you all right?" she asked, helping him up. "Been better," he gasped, "but I will live." Kellan was facing down the 6 men, his stance ready for a fight. "All of you get off my land. Now." "We are here to deliver a message," Hutchins said, wiping blood from his split lip. "Get rid of the witch or there will be consequences. The only consequence you need to worry about is what I will do if you ever threaten my wife again." Kellan's voice was deadly quiet. "I am giving you one chance to leave peacefully. Take it." The men hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. Then one of them, braver or stupider than the rest, reached for the gun at his hip. "Do not," Kellan said, and Delilah saw that he had retrieved a rifle from somewhere and had it trained on the man. "Just because I have a bad leg does not mean I cannot shoot straight." The tableau held for a long moment, tension crackling in the air. Then Hutchins swore and hauled himself back into his saddle. "This is not over," he warned. "You chose her over your own community. You will both pay for it." "Get out," Kellan repeated, and finally the men left, riding away in a cloud of dust and muttered threats. As soon as they were out of sight, Kellan turned to Delilah and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking, adrenaline and fear making her knees weak. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did they hurt you?" "I am fine. They grabbed me, but I am not hurt." "Kellan, though, they hit him." "I am fine," Kellan said, though he was holding his ribs gingerly. "Nothing broken, just bruised." "This is my fault," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face now. "This is all because of me." "They were right, Kellan. I have brought this down on you." "They were not right about anything," Kellan said fiercely. "They are ignorant and afraid and violent, but they are not right. You have done nothing wrong." "We should leave," Delilah said. "Leave San Elizario like they want. Start over somewhere else where no one knows me, where you and Kellan can be safe." Kellan pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Is that what you want, to run?" "I want you to be safe. Both of you. We are not running," Kellan said, coming to stand beside them. "This is our home. We worked too hard to build this place to let a bunch of superstitious fools drive us away. But they will keep coming. They will make your lives impossible. Then we make them see the truth," Kellan said. "We show them that you are no witch. That your remedies work, that you help people. We change their minds. I have been trying to change their minds for 3 years. You were alone. You are not alone anymore." Delilah looked at the two brothers, both of them bruised and ready to fight for her, and felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. "All right," she said. "We stay." The opportunity to change minds came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Kellan came galloping up to the house where Delilah was working on preparing tinctures for the winter. "There is a problem in town," he said, breathing hard. "A bad problem. The measles has gotten worse, and now little Emma Watson is struggling to breathe. Her mother is Mrs. Crawford's daughter." Delilah stood immediately. "The measles should not affect breathing unless there is a secondary infection. Pneumonia, most likely. The doctor is out of town, gone to El Paso, and will not be back for days. Mrs. Crawford was asking if anyone knew another doctor. I heard her when I was picking up supplies. She would never accept my help, not after everything." "A child is dying," Kellan said bluntly. "Pride should not matter." He was right, of course. Delilah gathered her supplies quickly, her mind already running through what she would need. Kellan had been working with one of the horses, and he came running when he saw Kellan return. "What is happening?" "Emma Watson is sick. Delilah is going to help." Kellan's expression hardened with determination. "I am coming with you." They rode into town together, the three of them, and the sight of them drew stares and whispers. Delilah ignored them all, heading straight for the Watson house. She could hear the child's labored breathing from the street. Mrs. Crawford was on the porch, and her face went white then red when she saw Delilah. "You are not welcome here." "My daughter is dying," a younger woman said from the doorway. "This must be Emma's mother, Jane Watson. She looked exhausted and terrified. Mama, if she can help. She is a witch. She will make it worse." "She saved my life," Kellan said, dismounting stiffly. "My leg was infected and the doctor said I would die. Delilah healed me. Let her try to help Emma." "I remember your daughter's cough last winter," Delilah said, addressing Mrs. Crawford directly. "You said the syrup I left was from the church, but you knew it was from me. It worked, did it not? Emma recovered in days. Mrs. Crawford's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Please, Jane Watson said, tears streaming down her face. I do not care if you are a witch or a saint. If you can save my daughter, I am begging you to try. Delilah looked at the young mother and saw her own desperation reflected back. I will do everything I can. She pushed past Mrs. Crawford and entered the house. The smell of sickness was heavy in the air, and when she reached Emma's bedside, her heart sank. The girl was perhaps 5 years old, her face flushed with fever, the distinctive measles rash covering her skin. But worse was the rattling sound of her breathing and the blue tinge to her lips. How long has she been breathing like this? Delilah asked, kneeling by the bed. Since this morning. It got bad fast. Delilah listened to Emma's chest and heard the wet crackle that confirmed her diagnosis, pneumonia and advanced. She turned to Kellan, who had followed her in. I need steam. Boiling water as much as can be managed and bring it into this room. We need to make the air moist so she can breathe easier. Kellan moved immediately to comply. To Jane, Delilah said, I need to prop her up. Lying flat makes it harder to breathe. Get me pillows. As Jane gathered pillows, Delilah opened her bag and began pulling out what she needed. Elecampane root for the lungs, mullein for congestion, coltsfoot for cough, and echinacea to fight infection. She worked quickly, measuring and mixing, creating a strong tea that she would need to coax the sick child to drink. Kellan returned with a pot of boiling water, and Delilah added eucalyptus leaves and peppermint. The steam rose, filling the room with the sharp, clearing scent. She positioned the pot carefully near the bed where Emma could breathe in the steam but not reach out and burn herself. She needs to drink this, Delilah said, holding up the tea she had made. It will not taste good, but it is essential. Small sips if that is all she can manage. Jane took the cup with shaking hands and began the slow process of getting her daughter to drink. Emma was barely conscious, but the steam seemed to be helping already. Her breathing, while still labored, was not quite as desperate. Delilah made a poultice for Emma's chest, a warming mixture that would help break up the congestion. She worked steadily, checking the child's pulse, listening to her breathing, adjusting the steam. Hours passed. Kellan brought more water to boil. Kieran stood guard at the door, keeping the curious and judgmental at bay. Mrs. Crawford hovered in the corner, her face a mixture of fear and suspicion, but she said nothing. As evening fell, Emma's breathing began to ease. The blue tinge faded from her lips and her fever started to break. Delilah coaxed more tea into her, and finally, blessedly, the child fell into a natural sleep rather than the frightening stupor she had been in before. She is going to be all right, Delilah said, standing and stretching her stiff back. The worst has passed. But she will need to keep drinking the tea, at least 3 cups a day, for the next week, and the steam treatments should continue for at least 3 more days. Jane Watson began to cry, great heaving sobs of relief. She threw her arms around Delilah, who stood stiff with surprise for a moment before returning the embrace. Thank you, Jane whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are welcome. I am glad I could help. Mrs. Crawford stepped forward and Delilah braced herself for more accusations. But the older woman's eyes were wet, and when she spoke, her voice shook. I was wrong about you. The words hung in the air, simple but profound. You were not using dark magic. You were using knowledge and skill and kindness. You saved my granddaughter's life when you could have turned us away after how we treated you. I was wrong, and I am sorry. Delilah felt tears sting her own eyes. I am just glad Emma will recover. News of Emma's miraculous recovery spread through San Elizario like wildfire. Within days, people who had crossed the street to avoid Delilah were nodding to her in greeting. The following week, a man knocked on the ranch door asking if she could look at his wife's swollen ankle. Then a mother came seeking help for her son's persistent cough. Word spread beyond San Elizario. People from neighboring ranches and towns began seeking Delilah out, paying in coin or trade or simply heartfelt thanks. The accusations of witchcraft faded, replaced by a growing reputation as a skilled healer. "You are becoming famous," Kellan teased one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Hardly famous, just accepted finally, more than accepted, respected." He pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I am proud of you. I could not have done it without you. You and Kellan gave me the courage to stand my ground. We just stood beside you. You did the hard part." Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered, the cattle thriving under Kellan and Kellan's care. Delilah's healing practice grew steadily, and she found herself genuinely part of the community for the first time. She taught several of the town's women about basic remedies, sharing her knowledge freely. Mrs. Crawford became an unlikely ally, her guilt over her past behavior driving her to defend Delilah loudly to anyone who would listen. Emma Watson recovered fully, and Jane brought her daughter to visit regularly, the little girl leaving flowers on Delilah's doorstep and calling her Aunt Delilah. A year after the wedding, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but the confirmation from her own knowledge and the signs her body was showing brought a joy so profound it took her breath away. She told Kellan that evening, pulling him away from the work he was doing on a new section of fence. "I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to the tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am better than all right. I am pregnant." For a moment, Kellan just stared at her. Then his face split into the widest grin she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the nearby horses. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down quickly, suddenly anxious. "Should I have done that? Did I hurt you?" "The baby," Delilah laughed. "I am fine." "We are fine. I am only a few months along." "We are having a baby," Kellan said wonderingly. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her belly, even though it was far too early to hear anything. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I already love you more than I thought possible." Tears streamed down Delilah's face as she ran her fingers through his hair. This man, this beautiful, kind, fierce man who had seen past fear and prejudice to love her, was going to be the father of her child. Kellan's reaction was equally enthusiastic. He immediately began planning additions to the house, insisting they would need a proper nursery. He started carving a cradle from mesquite wood, his hands patient and skilled as he shaped something beautiful from rough timber. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Delilah's own knowledge ensuring she ate well and took the herbs that would support both her and the baby. The town rallied around her in a way that would have been unthinkable 2 years before. Women brought baby clothes and blankets. Jane Watson hosted a gathering in Delilah's honor, showering her with gifts and advice. In the spring of 1878, as wildflowers painted the desert in unexpected colors, Delilah went into labor. Kellan was nearly frantic with worry, but she remained calm, trusting her body and her knowledge. She had assisted at enough births to know what to expect, and she had Jane and Mrs. Crawford both there to help. "You are doing beautifully," Jane encouraged as Delilah worked through a contraction. "Easy for you to say," Delilah panted, and the women laughed. Kellan paced outside with Kellan wearing a path in the dirt. "She will be fine," Kellan said. "She knows what she is doing. I know. I just wish I could do something to help." "You already did. You loved her when no one else would. You gave her a home and a family. That is everything." When the baby finally arrived, it was with a lusty cry that brought tears of relief to everyone's eyes. Jane wrapped the infant carefully and brought her to Delilah. "It is a girl," she said. "A perfect, healthy girl." Delilah held her daughter, marveling at the tiny face, the delicate fingers that wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength. She had her father's nose and a shock of dark hair. "Kellan," she called softly, "come meet your daughter." Kellan burst into the room, his face pale and anxious. But when he saw Delilah sitting up with the baby in her arms, both of them healthy and well, he nearly collapsed with relief. "She is perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "What should we name her?" "I thought we might name her Rose," Delilah said. "After your mother." Kellan's eyes filled with tears. "She would have loved that. She would have loved you." They named their daughter Rose Ann Grady, and she became the light of their lives. She was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. As she grew, it became clear she had inherited her mother's gift with plants. Even as a toddler, she was drawn to the garden, touching leaves with gentle hands and watching with fascination as Delilah prepared remedies. 2 years after Rose was born, Delilah gave birth to a son. They named him Thomas, after Kieran and Kellan's father, and he was as wild and energetic as his sister was calm and thoughtful. The house rang with laughter and sometimes tears, the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Kieran remained a constant presence, the beloved uncle who spoiled the children shamelessly. He eventually married Jane Watson, the young widow having fallen in love with the kind, gentle cowboy who had stood up for the witch the town feared. Their wedding was a joyous affair, and when Jane gave birth to a daughter of her own, little Emma Watson gained a baby sister. The years rolled on, measured in seasons and harvests, in children growing and love deepening. Delilah's reputation as a healer spread far beyond San Elizario. People traveled from as far as El Paso to consult with her, and she trained several apprentices, passing on the knowledge that had been given to her. She never forgot the fear and isolation of those early years, and she made sure to offer help to anyone who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay or their past treatment of her. Forgiveness, she learned, was its own kind of healing. Kellan proved to be as devoted a husband at 50 as he had been at 25. He still brought her wildflowers for no reason, still looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen, still made her laugh with his dry humor and gentle teasing. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house that had been expanded and improved over the years. Their children were inside, Rose now a young woman of 19 helping her 13-year-old brother with his studies while Emma and Jane visited with Kieran in the kitchen. "You ever regret it?" Kellan asked, his hand warm in hers. "Staying here after everything they put you through?" Delilah thought about the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "If we had left, we would have been running from fear. By staying, we changed things. The children growing up in San Elizario now will never know a time when herb women were called witches. They will see healing knowledge as something valuable, not something to fear. That matters." "You matter," Kellan said. "You changed this whole town just by being yourself, by refusing to hide your gifts. You are the bravest person I know." "I had help," Delilah said, leaning against his shoulder. "I had you. Always," he promised. "For all the days of my life you will have me." Rose came out onto the porch, her dark hair gleaming in the lamplight spilling from inside. She had her mother's keen eyes and her father's steady presence. "Mama, Mrs. Henderson's youngest has that terrible cough that has been going around. She sent her husband to ask if you could come by in the morning." "Of course," Delilah said. "Will you come with me? I want to show you how to make the syrup that works best for that kind of cough." Rose's face lit up. "Really? You will let me help prepare it? You are ready," Delilah said. "You have been ready for a while now." After Rose went back inside, Kellan squeezed Delilah's hand. "She is going to be an even better healer than you." "I hope so. The world needs healers. It always has, it always will." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside. The soft chorus of crickets in the garden, the distant call of a coyote on the hunt. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in impossible numbers. Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from feared outcast to respected healer, from solitary woman to beloved wife and mother. It had not been easy, and there had been times when she had wanted to give up. But Kellan had seen her, truly seen her, and that had made all the difference. "What are you thinking about?" Kellan asked softly. "How different my life might have been if you had not come riding up that day, desperate and trusting enough to ask a witch for help. You were never a witch. You were always just Delilah, the woman who healed because she could not stand to see others suffer. The woman I fell in love with the moment I saw you grinding herbs in your cabin, surrounded by plants and knowledge and strength. I love you," she said. "After all these years, I love you more every day." "And I love you," he replied. "My wife, my partner, my heart." Inside, Thomas was laughing at something Kieran had said, and Rose was explaining some fine point of herbalism to her young brother with all the seriousness of a natural teacher. The sounds of family, of home, of a life built on trust and love and hard work. Delilah had been called a witch by the town, feared and shunned and threatened. But a cowboy had trusted her remedies, and then he had trusted her with his heart. From that trust had grown everything she held dear: love, family, purpose, and a place in a community that had once rejected her. She had changed the town, yes, but the town had changed her too. She was no longer the isolated, wary woman who had been afraid to hope for connection. She was a wife, a mother, a healer respected and welcomed. She belonged. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of a life well lived. Rose married a young doctor from El Paso who had come to study with Delilah and had fallen in love with both her knowledge and her daughter. Together, Rose and her husband opened a proper clinic in San Elizario, blending traditional medicine with the herbal remedies Delilah had perfected. It was everything Delilah had hoped for, a merging of old and new, respect for both approaches to healing. Thomas followed his father and uncle into ranching, taking over more of the day-to-day operations as Kellan and Kieran grew older. He was a natural horseman and had his father's steady temperament and his mother's compassionate heart. When he married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, the wedding was attended by what seemed like half of West Texas. Kieran and Jane had 3 more children after their first daughter, and the Grady ranch became a place of noise and joy. Children running between the houses and learning to ride almost before they could walk. The bonds between the two families were unbreakable, forged in those early days of standing together against prejudice and fear. As Delilah entered her 50s, her hair silvering but her hands still steady and her mind still sharp, she finally wrote down all the remedies and knowledge her grandmother had passed to her orally. She created a comprehensive book of herbal medicine, illustrated with drawings Rose contributed, explaining not just what worked but why. It was published by a small press in El Paso and gained wider circulation than she ever expected, reaching other herbalists and doctors across the West. Letters began arriving from women and men who had read her book and wanted to learn more, to share their own knowledge, to build on what she had started. Delilah answered every letter personally, creating a network of healers who could support and teach each other. "You have done something remarkable," Kellan told her one evening as she worked on responding to the latest batch of correspondence. He was grayer now, lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Delilah, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I just wrote down what I knew. You created a legacy. You made sure that knowledge will not be lost, that other women will not be called witches for having the gift of healing." Delilah set down her pen and moved to sit beside him. "We created it together. If you had not believed in me, trusted me, loved me, I would still be that frightened woman living alone at the edge of town, too afraid to hope for anything better." "No," Kellan said firmly. "You would have found your way. You are too strong, too determined not to. I was just lucky enough to be there when you needed someone to stand beside you." On their 30th anniversary, the entire town of San Elizario threw them a celebration. The plaza was decorated with lanterns and flowers, tables groaning with food that everyone had contributed. Delilah and Kellan danced under the stars, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors and former patients. Mrs. Crawford, now elderly and moving slowly but still sharp-tongued, raised a toast to Delilah and Kellan Grady. 30 years ago, this town nearly drove away the best thing that ever happened to it. We were fools, blinded by fear and ignorance. But Delilah had the grace to forgive us and the strength to stay and prove us wrong. She has healed our bodies and our community. We are blessed to have her and blessed that Kellan Grady was smart enough to see what we could not. To the Gradys, to the Gradys, the crowd echoed, and Delilah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Happy tears?" Kellan asked softly, wiping them away with his thumb. "The happiest," she confirmed. As they grew older still, Kellan's joints stiffened from years of hard work, and Delilah developed a cough that worried her children. But they had each other, and they had built something that would outlast them both. Rose's clinic was thriving, treating patients from across the region. Thomas's ranch was prosperous and well-respected. Their grandchildren were growing up in a world where healing women were honored, not feared. On a warm spring morning in 1901, Kellan and Delilah sat together in the garden behind their house. Now lush with the medicinal plants Delilah had spent decades cultivating. He was reading to her from a newspaper, and she was mending a tear in one of Thomas's shirts, her hands still nimble despite her years. "You remember that first day?" Kellan asked suddenly. "When I rode up to you in town, desperate and probably wild-eyed, begging you to help Kieran." "I remember everything about that day," Delilah said. "I remember thinking you looked like you had not slept in days. I remember how you did not flinch when I touched you, did not pull away in fear like everyone else. I remember feeling hope for the first time in so long. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and then you opened your mouth and I realized you were brilliant too. I was lost from that moment." "We saved each other," Delilah said softly. "Yes," Kellan agreed. "We did." They sat in comfortable silence, the sun warm on their faces, the air filled with the scent of growing things and the distant sound of Rose's children playing. A breeze rustled through the herbs, releasing their fragrances: lavender and rosemary, sage and mint. "I would not change a single moment," Delilah said. "Not the fear or the pain or the struggle. It all led me here to you, to this life." Kellan reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that twisted his fingers. "Every day with you has been a gift. Every single day." They had both lived long, full lives by the time they passed within months of each other, Kellan first and then Delilah, as if she could not bear to be without him for long. The entire town of San Elizario mourned, and people came from across Texas and beyond to pay their respects to the woman who had changed hearts and minds, who had taught that knowledge was not to be feared but celebrated. Rose and Thomas stood together at their parents' graveside, united in grief but also in gratitude for the legacy they had inherited. The clinic still operated, busier than ever. The ranch still thrived, now run by Thomas's children. And most importantly, the lessons Kellan and Delilah had taught, about courage and love and standing firm in the face of prejudice, lived on in everyone who had known them. The headstone was simple, as they would have wanted. Delilah and Kellan Grady, beloved parents, grandparents, and partners in all things. But everyone who visited the grave knew the words that should have been carved there as well. The herbalist who was called a witch, and the cowboy who trusted her remedies and then her heart, and together they changed the world. Years turned into decades, and San Elizario grew and changed with the times. But the story of Delilah and Kellan Grady was passed down through generations, a reminder of what courage and love could accomplish. The clinic Rose founded eventually became a hospital, with Delilah's book still referenced in the herbal medicine program they established. The ranch Thomas built up was still run by Grady's, still prosperous and respected. In every generation, there was at least one child who inherited Delilah's gift with plants, who could walk into the desert and know instinctively which herbs would heal and which would harm. They were trained carefully, taught not just the remedies but the values: compassion, patience, the importance of seeing each person as worthy of care regardless of who they were or how they had behaved. The little cabin where Delilah had lived alone, before Kellan came into her life, was preserved and eventually turned into a small museum. Visitors could see her original mortar and pestle, the leather bag she had carried on that desperate ride to save Kieran, bundles of dried herbs carefully preserved behind glass. But more than the physical artifacts, the place held the memory of transformation, of a woman refusing to be defined by others' fear. On the 100th anniversary of Delilah and Kellan's wedding, the town held a celebration. Descendants of the Grady family came from all over the country, along with descendants of the people Delilah had healed and taught. There were doctors and nurses, herbalists and teachers, ranchers and business people, all connected by the thread of that original love story. The mayor, a great-granddaughter of Emma Watson, stood in the town plaza and told the story as it had been passed down. How a young herbalist had been persecuted for her gifts, how a cowboy had seen past the fear to the woman beneath, how their love had healed not just individuals but an entire community's capacity for acceptance and change. "We honor them today not just as our ancestors," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "but as examples of what we all should strive to be. Brave enough to stand against injustice, wise enough to trust love over fear, strong enough to forgive those who wrong us." Delilah and Kellan Grady made San Elizario a better place, and we are all living in the world they helped create. In the crowd, a young woman stood with her small daughter. The girl was named Delilah, after her several times great-grandmother, and she was already showing signs of the family gift. She loved plants and animals, was endlessly curious about how things grew and healed. Her mother watched her with pride and thought about the legacy they carried. "Mama," the little girl asked, "was our grandmother really called a witch?" "She was, baby, but she was never a witch. She was a healer, and she was brave, and she found someone who loved her exactly as she was." "I want to be like her," the girl said seriously. "Then you will be," her mother replied. "The best parts of her live on in all of us." The sun set over San Elizario, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, the same colors it had shown on that long-ago day when Kellan Grady first asked Delilah Kincaid for help. The town had changed beyond recognition from those rough early days, but the heart of it remained the same. A place where healing was honored, where love could overcome prejudice, where courage and compassion were the highest values. And in the quiet of evening, when the celebrations had ended and people returned to their homes, if you stood very still in the garden behind the old Grady ranch house, you could almost hear echoes of laughter, feel the warmth of a love that had burned so bright it changed everything it touched. The story of the herbalist and the cowboy was not just history. It was a living legacy, renewed with every act of healing, every choice to trust instead of fear, every moment of standing up for what was right even when it was not easy. Delilah and Kellan had shown that love was not just about romance, though theirs had been deep and true. It was about seeing and being seen, about standing together against the world when necessary, about building something that would outlast your own brief time on earth. They had been called many things over the years: the witch and her cowboy, the healer and her love, the couple who changed a town. But in the end, they were simply Delilah and Kellan, two people who found each other against all odds and built a life on trust, respect, and unwavering devotion. And that, more than any remedy or cure, was the real magic.